from the chat room.
Great. Okay.
Right on. We are so live. It's painful. Welcome everybody to Highlands to Islands. Not really painful. It's actually quite fun. Welcome everybody to Highlands to Islands. This is our episode where we get to chalk. Although that's relevant, to talk about chill filtration versus non-chill filtration, bottlings from Glenmorangie, Ardbeg, independent bottlings, all kinds of stuff. Our guest, we will have two guests. One of them, there's Jason right now. He's added. We're going to add him to the stream. Jason. Jason has arrived on set. That is awesome.
Thank you.
So this is Josh and Jason from Single Cast Nation that have graced us with our presence, and we're going to talk a bit about chill filtration, the process, the science behind it, the chemistry behind it, the decision-making process behind it, and so on and so forth. And, of course, as well as instances where it does not happen and why. So if you guys will indulge us for just a second, Cam and I are just going to rattle off a few different expressions from Glenmorangie and Ardbeg, since that's the premise of the show, that are and aren't chill filtered, and what might have been going on in the minds of Dr. Bill Lumsden, Brendan McCarran, Gillian McDonald, the members of the Whiskey Creation team. I guess since... Cam, from your perspective, there certainly isn't a whole lot going on in terms of chill-filtered Ardbegs. In fact, before the show started, I could only really think of one. I mean, I'm sure there are others, but the old Ardbeg 17 bottle at 40 ABV, one of the incarnations of Ardbeg 17 bottle at 40 ABV, of course, would have been. Are there others that you can think of off the top of your head?
Not in recent memory, but it's actually very funny that today, I was kind of scrolling around on Instagram and on Facebook early this morning, as I, quite restless early in the mornings, and I came across the page for the Ardbeg project on Facebook. A member and a true Ardbegian had actually posted an independent bottler called Darkest that just released an Ardbeg 14 100%. Pedro Jimenez sherry cask, if I remember correctly, that appeared to be bottled at 42.7. So from the Ardbeg core range itself, the 17 would have been the last thing in recent memory. But from indie bottlers such as the two lovely gentlemen that we have on the chat today, there are and have been some absolutely beautiful and delicious renditions of Ardbeg, but nothing chill filtered from the core range of Ardbeg itself.
And that was my suspicion. I suppose, Joshua and Jason, I'm sure you've seen some indie bottlings out there, maybe some of which were, most of which were not, and they're kind of hard to come by these days just in terms of indie bottled Ardbegs in general. But from the Glenmorangie perspective, here's the deal. There are some that are and some that aren't. So clearly we have a situational sort of criteria as to why we would or would not do subject a whiskey of ours to this chill filtration process. And to be clear, this happens after maturation and after cutting to strength. So it's the very, very last thing that happens, if it's going to happen, before the whiskey ends up in the bottle. And this would be really any whiskey that's bottled at under 46 ABV, almost any. There are a couple of distillery bottlings out there that are perennially 43 ABV and non-chill filtered. I can think of Enoch off the top of my head does that on a regular basis, and kudos to those guys. That's awesome. By the end of this, we'll get to. I think we'll collectively arrive at the conclusion that drink what you like and go with it. But. From Glenmorangie perspective, let's just rattle these off. Original from the permanent range. Original La Santa and 18 year are 43, and this is in the U.S. 43 ABV products that are chill filtered, and the Quinta Ruban, Nectar d'Or, and Signet are the 46s and aren't. Now that's typically chalked up to aesthetic reasons, so that lipids don't fall out of solution when the proof drops below 92 proof or 46 ABV. And I think that that's basically the case for us as well. Any distiller, if you're putting out a distiller bottling, a distillery bottling, the distiller on some level, unless it's cask strength, has made the decision that they're going to sell you a product that they've already decided for all intents and purposes, the ABV that you're going to drink it at. Cask strength selections, you make that decision and the distiller doesn't. But the vast majority of the whiskeys out there, of course, the distiller makes that decision for you. And that's based on the organoleptics that that person has in his or her head that they want to have in the bottle at the end of the day. So if that's best represented at 43, then it's going to basically have to be chill filtered in order for it to not go hazy even on the shelf. Lipids, just really quickly, lipids are defined as something that is not soluble in water, but is soluble in alcohol, ether, and chloroform. Just in case you're wondering what the technical definition is. I know I was. So those are some rough definitions. You basically got complex fats, fatty acids, waxes, all fall into that category. So if you remove those, by the time you get below 46 ABV, they begin to fall out of solution. They begin to form micelles and start to make haze in your whiskey. So primarily, we're making those decisions based on the aesthetics. Secondarily, I do find that they tend to be a little bit brighter on the palate, but they tend not to be quite as mouth-filling, and the length of finish is slightly shorter. So it tends to be a more textural thing for Glenmorangie in terms of the textural shift between chill filtered and non. So with that in mind, thank you both for being a part of this thing. You obviously have a tremendous amount of experience in choosing casks, in evaluating organoleptics, and working with consumers. I mean, obviously, we're both, the distillery bottlings and the independent bottlings rely on the consumer to buy the stuff, or we all go out of business. So there's a certain amount of that, I'm sure, in your heads as you work through this process. But in terms of ABV, are the products that are coming from Single Cask Nation always at cask strength? Is that a thing? Is that a corporate ethos among the two of you?
Yeah, it most definitely is. And when people think of alcohol, it's almost counterintuitive that you would see a higher ABV. You know, if you see a whiskey in the 50s and you would say, oof, that's going to be a hot whiskey. Well, the fact of the matter is you're not cutting that whiskey down with anything. You're not chill filtering. You don't need to. And all of those lipids, all those natural oils within the whiskey actually help to protect your tongue from that heat, from that alcohol. And, you know, conversely, if you look at a whiskey that's maybe a blend at 40% alcohol, those could potentially be pretty darn hot. And that's because they've been chill filtered, you know, far past a point that they should have ever been chill filtered. And you're just getting straight up that alcohol heat and no oils to protect your tongue. So as independent bottlers, it's incredibly important for us to never chill filter, because we are looking for that texture, that natural texture within the whiskey.
Yeah, to put the leaves on those branches, ethanol is lipidphilic. So when ethanol enters your mouth, it's looking for the fats present in your mouth. So if your mouth has lived a life that day, you're going to have some fats, you know, from whatever you've eaten, whatever you've consumed over the course of the day. When you then bring in that big alcohol, right, that's what's going to hit your taste buds. And so that presence of the fat within the liquid that's in the bottle, for us at cask strength, that's what Joshua was talking about, protecting the palate, protecting the taste buds. And so, and I think that we always say in our tastings, some independent bottlers are color folk, right? That's a very big word to be throwing out this early in an interview. I do apologize.
Thank you.
There. And so, yeah, the thing we say in our tasting is some independent bottlers are driven by color. Whiskey must be whiskey colored. For Joshua and I, we are texture guys. And so if we're consuming at cask strength, single cask at cask strength, we want that mouth coating experience, and we want that protection from the alcohol. Consumers should be able to take down, dilute as they see fit, not as we see fit. But as you were starting out there, Dan, you know, there's so many different types of consumers. If there was only the one consumer, well, a whole bunch of us would go out of business real fast. So, for our consumer, for our nation members, for our consumers around the world, we want them to be making choices based on full fat whiskey.
You raise a really interesting point, Joshua. First off, that there are degrees of chill filtration. There are a myriad of different vehicles for which you can chill filter, and the degree of which that you do end up chill filtering a whiskey. Obviously, not you all, but can have a massive impact not only on flavor profile, but also the way that things feel when you drink them as well. And Jason, you put that really, really well. Something I love to discuss with people is that we should be conscious of not only the aromatic profile of which can also be hindered by chill filtration, or affected by chill filtration, I should say, but then also the way things feel when we drink them as well, the palate application.
Yeah, I agreed wholeheartedly. And if we want people to look at us really funny, we bring up nose texture. And so as you're nosing a whiskey, how's that even feeling as it goes through the olfactory system? And boy, there are tastings when people think you're already drunk and you're only on your first paragraph. But yeah, we love talking about nose texture. And very quickly, we took ownership of that a fair few years ago now, Joshua. And we were on a trip through to Westland Distillery in Seattle. And they've got their little sensory room with a checklist. And one of the items was nose texture. And I thought it made it day. That was such a happy moment that a distillery good enough for Remy to purchase also goes looking for nose texture. So.
That's so funny that you mentioned them, because I have them down in my notes. Being a tried and true Seattle, born native, this is my home. I'm actually located here currently right now.
Nice.
Huge amount of love and respect for Westland, and Matt as a distiller is avant-garde, but rooted in tradition. So I have a lot of love for them. But again, a great representation of a whiskey that actually quite often does bottle below 46%, but also makes the choice to not chill filter some of their whiskeys, which is quite interesting.
Interesting, yes.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, we like to pick up the fill your own that's on site. We've had a lot of success with those ones.
Cameron, to your point about the varying degrees of chill filtration, that's actually something I learned from our mutual friend, Dr. Bill Lumsden. I was doing an interview with him maybe 10 years or so ago, and we were asking about chill filtration process, and I really liked his answer. And maybe you can tell me if this still rings true as far as Glenmorangie goes. But his answer about chill filtration with Glenmorangie Original is that Glenmorangie goes for a lighter chill filtration so as not to pull everything out. They want to pull enough out to avoid as much clouding as possible, but leave enough in to still retain that good mouthfeel, have a longer finish than you would have if you went, full hog on the chill filtration. And I found that fascinating. I didn't know that until my conversation with them.
Yeah, the thing that happens at Glenmorangie, and I'm sure he rattled it off for you, is there are two factors in place there that can be manipulated on a distiller's whim kind of a level. One is the density of the cellulose portion of the filter. The other one is the temperature at which the whiskey goes through the filtration process. The number of plates, clearly, there may be as many as 20, 25 cellulose plates in a chill filtration system. So you can decide the number of plates that you've got in there, the temperature, obviously the pressure going through, and the density of the filter itself, and whether or not those have the diatome, the DE coating on them to remove proteins as well. So what happens at Glenmorangie is a higher than industry average ambient temperature of the liquid as it goes through the system. So 45 Fahrenheit versus 33 to 34 Fahrenheit, which is sort of industry standard. So to your collected point, the micelles aren't going to be as big because the chill isn't there. So there'll be more of them that pass through, and the filter density is lower at Glenmorangie as well. So the idea behind a mild chill filtration, and a lot of times consumers hear the word and they think it's one or the other. One thing has happened or one thing hasn't happened, and there are shadings clearly that happen as a result of distillers' decision-making process regarding how they apply that or don't apply that process to their whiskeys. So yes, that is still absolutely the case at Glenmorangie. You guys have brought up an interesting point about nose feel, and I wanted to pick your brains about this. Not your noses, your brains.
You have to go through our noses to get to the brain.
To get to the brain. Oh, sure. Well, no, that makes absolute sense. Obviously, when you pour, and I just did a single cask nation McDuff 13 into this glass at 50. What did we decide? 9 or so. As you pour those whiskeys, of course, there are going to be alcohols that are vaporizing out of solution and hanging out there in the glass. Do you have, personally, do you have a methodology? Because alcohol vapor is an anesthetic, and you don't necessarily want to shut your system down, but I'm sure that you guys have some personal methodologies for mitigating that so that your organoid or your olfactory sensations are as vivid as they can be without being sort of stifled by the concentration of alcoholic vapor.
Yeah, so there's two things that we tend to talk about, especially early on in a tasting where people are just getting acclimatized to the whiskeys. It may be 40s, it may be in the 40s, it may be in the 50s, whatever it is. If this is your first whiskey, the alcohol could be intense on your nose, it could be intense on your palate. And so what we always tell people is, because alcohol is always evaporating from the glass, blow a puff of air into the glass to dissipate the alcohol.
Yep.
Now you can actually smell the whiskey, right? And that is it. Whenever we do that, it's amazing. People's faces light up. They'd never even thought to do that. Now they may have been drinking a certain whiskey or whiskeys for a few years and now have a new tool to help them discover more flavors, discover more scents. And then the other thing that we like to talk about as well is, both your nose and your tongue can get fatigued, right? You've got that alcohol that puts a bit of hurt onto your olfactory system. And so sometimes you need to reset your nose. And this may sound really weird, but our biggest trick whenever we select casks is if we find we're getting a bit of fatigue, we just smell our arm. Mm-hmm. It completely neutralizes everything that's going on. It gives you a scent that you're most familiar with. It cancels everything out, and then you go back to it, and now you're smelling things in your whiskey that you hadn't smelled before. So those are two tricks.
Factory reset button. Reset button. I like.
Yeah, control.
I really like that. Yep, exactly. I think I first saw a tasting of you kind of blowing into the glass maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. And to me, I was like, "Oh, that is a nifty, a nifty trick." And I hadn't really thought of it before, but it made so much sense. Is that you're clearing, you're clearing out all of these vapors that may muddy the pristine. Sorry, words are hard. The pristine picture that you're trying to kind of glean through an olfactory experience with a glass of whiskey.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, I have to admit, I was baiting you with that question because I stole that technique from you as well. So I've absolutely stolen that from you. I'd seen you'd done a podcast or an interview of some kind, and you said it was that same Cam. You had the same sort of light bulb moment. Like, I've always been able to do that, and I've always been able to think of doing that, but I haven't. Until now, so thank you for that. That was a bit of a game changer. We talk a bit about everybody's got their technique, everybody's got their whiskey golf swing that they do, and that is an element of mine that I dialed in from the time that I heard that podcast, and it really has changed, particularly. And I'm sure you guys do them too when you are on a judging panel, or something, and you're at 30, 40, 50 whiskeys that you've got to get through in 2 sessions, and you just, by the end of it, it sounds like falling into a vat of beer. The theory is much more pleasant sounding than the actual practice of it, because you'd sink like a stone and drown. A judging panel at a whiskey festival, it starts out awesome, and by the end, it is you're just crawling to the finish line, because your face is done, your olfactory system is. Your epithelium is kind of dripping out of your ears. Your will to live is waning, just aggressively waning. And so that's one of the things that thing that you do. That's one of the things that I have used on tasting panels to just survive it, because you don't want to. There was an argument that just happened recently. Who was having this argument about whiskey judging? How do you? Because if you got 8 or 9 or 10 judges, and the whole point of having 8 or 9 or 10 judges around a table is to get some kind of blended average of scores. And so I get that. But if you submit a thing, like you guys, and I don't know how often you do this stuff, you submit a bottle of cask strength something to a judging panel, and 10 different people are going to do 10 different things to your product. And almost none of them are going to render an opinion based on the actual product in the bottle, only an opinion on how they altered your product. So how do you mitigate that? I mean, do you worry? Do you sit up at night and worry about that, or no?
So here's the thing, Dan. So we do not submit single casks to competition. The focus for us is the nation, and so we ask very similar questions of the nation, right?
Jason, could you explain to our listeners what you mean by the nation? Oh shoot, I don't know.
We may be losing him just a little bit.
I just did as you asked me that question.
Okay, so
we lost it for just a second. Jason.
Which one of us is out of step with the other here? So just to be clear, if you didn't hear my answer as Joshua spoke over the top of me, my answer, the nation. The nation, we're a single cask nation. We were founded online in 2011. People join the nation online and they purchase bottles from us. That's been true for almost a decade now. In 2017, we launched US retail, started selling to consumers. So we've added nation members, consumers, and then in the last year, we've launched global sales as well. So we're trying to get comfortable talking about nation members, nation fans, nation consumers, but basically anybody who buys our whiskey. And so those are the people we're thinking about when we make the selection. And so let me connect this to what you were saying earlier as well, Dan. Mm-hmm. Whenever we've got a selection to do, Josh and I will get together online, we'll line up our samples. We try not to go more than 20 samples at any one time because of what you're talking about. It just gets exhausting and all the fun goes out of it. So we'll line up however many samples we've got that day. We will do the nose test on every single one. And any sample that fails the nose test is rejected. So that's how we cut down on the number of full samples that we have to process in order to make a selection. Any whiskey, any sample that then passes the nose test, we do the palate test. Any that fail the palate test get rejected. And then those that pass the palate test move on to the finish. And then, obviously, it's hard to separate mouth, palate, and finish. But anybody, I take them so personally. They're all my children. Any that don't pass the test, that get removed, that's the end of the line for them. Then we focus on the notes and the selection on what's left. So with that said, one of the things that Joshua and I consider is we're sitting here at 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning with fresh palates, clean palates, selecting casks. Invariably, people are not drinking whiskey at 9 o'clock in the morning, right? And certainly not in some kind of scientific, repeatable environment. And so the only thing we can do is select the very best whiskey that is presented to us, and then a nation member who drinks it on a Friday night with friends, or a nation member who drinks it on a Saturday afternoon and likes to dilute it, or somebody who wants to put an ice cube in it and drink it over ice. That's the drinking portion of things, and everybody should always drink in a way that makes them most happy. When we're in the business of selection, all we can do is select the very best that comes across our desk. So, Joshua, this has been your point over recent weeks, is thinking more deeply about the context in which our selections are consumed. And so I won't put any more words in your mouth.
Yeah. So like Jason said, we do not submit bottles for judging panels because our bottlings are so very finite. By the time that if we were to get an award, by the time we got an award, no one would be able to find that bottle because it will have sold out, right? So it just, from a business standpoint, I guess from a brand standpoint, it would make some sense, but anyway, we don't really participate, but we can certainly we can certainly put ourselves in the shoes of a judge who would have to judge many samples, right? Because we judge many samples. So Jason explained to you our process and what we do to try to mitigate how just annihilated our palates can get. But we found it kind of important tasting whiskeys at different points of the day to see how we connect with them. And I had gotten this idea, and Dan, you'll like this, being a fellow musician. I got this idea from the last time I was in a recording studio. And the producer had 4 different sets of speakers.
Oh,
he had his really nice monitors where you could hear everything. I'm like, yep, that sounds great. He said, no, hold on. Here's some not so great speakers. These are the types of speakers most people have, right? And then you hear a little less. We're like, okay, yep, that still sounds good. And it says, wait, hold on. And then he plays the music through crappy car speakers. Right? And so you're judging the music in all 3 different situations. And we do the same with whiskey, right? Because just like Jason had said, we're selecting a cask at 8 a.m. People aren't drinking whiskey at 8 a.m. unless they have a 12-step program they need to visit later. They're drinking whiskey in the evening when they've had breakfast and lunch and dinner and coffee through the day, and their palates are already kind of dulled. So we need to make sure that whatever whiskeys we pick, whatever whiskeys we put in a bottle, meet those different contextual situations.
That makes a lot of sense. And we had talked, you were kind enough to sit for an interview for us for a pilot show that we did back in April. And we talked a bit about that process by which you try to put yourself in other people's heads to an extent. Obviously you're the arbiters of what goes in the bottle, but you are sensitive enough. There's a certain whiskey empathy that sort of exudes through the bottles, and you are attempting to pick casks that stand on their own without necessarily having to apply water to them, without necessarily having to be in, as Jason said, a scientific sort of a controlled environment. If you're in Scotland buying casks and it's 8 a.m, you're in Scotland, that's a good thing. Somebody drinking at 5 o'clock after they've just gotten written up at work or whatever, that's a different mindset. So I'm sitting and having this McDuff, and I get it that it's difficult for a whiskey to speak its full story at cask strength sometimes, because potency can be a prison for subtlety. And what you guys do, and every bottle I've had of yours, somehow that doesn't enter into it. I'm having this McDuff full on, and it's humming. It's working. There's nothing hiding. There's nothing hiding from me behind a wall of potency. And I run into that a lot with cask strength whiskeys from distillery bottlings, independent bottlings. Either way, I find that, and this is obviously I poured it whatever it was 30 minutes and 7 seconds ago. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of mitigation there. But I'm really impressed with the way that you guys, and I don't think that, I mean, you have amazing palates, but I think there's also that empathy thing. There's also that willingness to put yourself inside the heads of the nation and try to make sure that they are extracting as much value as they possibly can from leveraging your ability to pick a good cask. And establishing that relationship with you. I think it's really, really fascinating. And kudos to you guys. You do a really good job of it.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, that means the world coming from you and the life you've lived with whiskey. So thank you very much. The point very quick point I would throw in there, just as you mentioned, being in Scotland and being in warehouses, and Joshua and I talk about context, and we've talked about it in this interview. It's very easy and it's very romantic to tell the tale of being in a warehouse in Scotland, crawling over casks, finding hidden gems, right? It's also very easy to be in a Scottish warehouse, spending more money than you've walked in with, and then walking out with casks that you might not have selected if you weren't standing in a warehouse in Scotland drinking them. Right. Casks taste very different when you're standing in a warehouse, popping bungs, just the romance. You finally feel like you've made it in this industry when you're popping. What we always do is, again, it's back to that narrowing down aspect again. When we're in a warehouse, we are isolating casks that we would like to explore once we get them back to our office, back to the controlled environment that Joshua and I sit in order to select casks. So we never buy when we're on the ground in Scotland. It still does come back to the office.
I've got a question. I've got a question for you. With that being said, then, what is the criteria for when you're walking through this, incredibly romantic situation and just kind of overcome with the sheer moment of walking through Distillery X, and you are kind of walking through their dunnage warehouses and picking out casks. What is it that makes you want to investigate the liquid profile of cask 137 versus cask 569?
Yeah, that's a solid question. Solid. Joshua, do you want to turn speaking?
Yeah. I guess the answer to that is I don't think that the answer to that is necessarily what you expect. So for the most part, independent bottlers actually are not doing that. Mm-hmm. We're meeting with brokers. We're getting lists from them of casks that are available. And then we take a look at what they have. We take a look backwards to see what we've released, when we've released it, where we've released it, how we've released it, etc., to see how potentially one of these casks on offer may fit, right? So cask selection from that standpoint is the norm, right? So you get the list, you see the stuff you like, then you request the sample, and especially during these unusual times when we're not traveling at all, we get the sample shipped to our safe place here, our controlled environment where we're used to selecting samples. So that's the common bit. The more uncommon bit that we still have a lot of fun doing is what Jason had described, and that's going to a distillery into their warehouse and select some casks. And now, why we would want to taste whiskey from cask 137 over cask 536, it could be completely arbitrary. Right? It depends on what distillery we're with and who we're with. If we're at the Glenmorangie distillery and we're with our friend Ian Allen, and he may say, I forgot to tell you guys, we had put some stuff in these old Turkish, whatever kinds of casks. And it's peated spirit. Let's give this a go. All of a sudden, any preconceived idea we had of, okay, we're going to go meet with Glenmorangie, we're going to taste these bourbon casks, goes out the window because now something else is on offer. And so we like to go into the situation just being open to what the distillery is interested in offering to us. Because for us, if we have a distillery direct relationship, that is almost more important than independently bottling their whiskey. We're in a strange way stewards of their brand, and we have to show our consumers, our nation members, a great whiskey. And if we're collaborative with a distillery, we're real keen to know what they want to show. But they also understand that we're interested in stuff off the beaten path as well. So we have to meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think a good example of what Cameron's asking is going down to Wild Turkey and picking with Eddie Russell in the warehouse, right? Like, in that moment, you're having a very good day, right? Your life has brought you to a very good place.
Yeah.
And so Joshua and I are always bouncing off of each other in that moment. What are you getting in here that you like? What are you getting in here that you'd return to? What are you getting in here that's of interest? And absolutely the point that Joshua had at the end there, what's taking us off the Wild Turkey beaten path here? And that's a great path to go and explore. And in, making ire of myself. Whoa, my own camera just cut out on me there. I've said too much about Wild Turkey. They've pulled the feed. That's actually a moment where we do select in the warehouse, and we're very cautious when we're doing that. And then we're always finding a way to follow up with samples to make sure that we got what we wanted out of that experience. But yeah, here's the God's honest truth, Cameron. I'm trying to talk around the answer. When we're in the warehouse, we taste and we taste and we taste some more. And once we get a decent amount of tastes, we're able to start saying what was better than what, where, and when. And invariably we'll say things like, that one that was just inside the corner, I really like that one. That on the far side, I might want to revisit that again. And so we're not even talking cast numbers. We're just talking hard and fast. What's in front of us? Where were we when we tasted it? What was our impression? Do we want to go back to it? It's hugely inexact, but there's a lot of back and forth between me and Joshua, always pinging off the other. And I think that helps us in that selection.
You both said something that immediately, I was like, oh my God, the flashing lights in my head kind of went off there. Joshua, to your point, you very much so are stewards of the brands that you have incredible relationships with. And Jason, to your point about Wild Turkey, I think that's a really great instance of how those things kind of coexist with each other, because Wild Turkey is another, an American whiskey brand that is very famous for having an element of chill filtration, even in whiskeys that are vastly above 46% alcohol by volume. So right there, the fact that the ethos of Single Cask Nation is to non-chill filter immediately makes it a great prism to look at the history, the lineage, the house style of whiskeys that Jimmy and Eddie have made for generations now, but through a slightly different vantage point,
Yeah. If I can tell you a quick story that we shared on the podcast, and so I feel okay making this public. I don't think Eddie will be too upset. Is we had a day when we were in the warehouse, and there was a cask off to the side, and just in chalk written on the end was rejected. And so for Joshua and I, gosh, if they ever want to sell casks to us in the first 3 minutes of any visit, just walk us past anything that says rejected, right? And so we immediately kind of did one of those, okay, and so we said to Eddie, like, oh, that's my camera going down. We said to Eddie, oh, rejected, and he said, yeah, there's nothing wrong with the whiskey. It just doesn't fit the Wild Turkey profile. We will not be using that cask as a single cask. It will go off and disappear into a blended product, a vatted product, if we can still say that word. And so for us, it was like, well, anything that doesn't fit your Wild Turkey profile, if it's a good whiskey, if we enjoy the experience, a word that we picked up in January of this year from John Glazer, if it's captivating, right? Captivating is a word that we use now internally. And that's just a flat out steal from John Glazer. But, that's what we're looking for. And if I can take BJ Reed's question here while I'm on the roll.
Feel free.
BJ,
I'm just going to...
Yeah, cheers.
Is that the one?
So, yeah, BJ, you're absolutely spot on here. We, in those moments, especially in that warehouse, specifically Wild Turkey that we're talking about, when Joshua and I are pinging off of each other, we're paying attention to how are the pallets holding up. And I would say, and Joshua, your number could be different here, I'm pretty comfortable with 15 to 20 cask strength samples, because it's not that we're drinking an ounce of everything to come to conclusions. It's coming back to what we're saying earlier. How's the nose first and foremost? For the most part in the warehouse, your nose is going to be successful because you've got an amazing nose round about you, right? It smells fantastic. So the nose is already off to a good start, which is why we're so careful about always following up with our selections. So, but then we do the hardest thing, not quite imaginable, but it's a difficult whiskey thing. If we nose it and it's okay and we taste it and it's not quite of interest, whatever's left in the glass gets tossed. And that's very difficult for me. It's not easy throwing away perfectly good whiskey, but if you want to preserve your palate, if you want to get through those 15 or 20, whether we're in a warehouse or whether we're in our offices doing this, it has to be done. You have to walk away from perfectly fine whiskey in order to save yourself for wonderful whiskey.
And just really quickly to bring it back to the non-chill filtration bit, another reason why we as independent bottlers choose not to chill filter our whiskeys is we're trying to, with each bottle we do, replicate the experience of drinking whiskey directly from a cask, right? When you open up one of our bottles at natural cask strength, it's as close as you'll get. And if we were to take that whiskey and alter it, dilute it, chill filter it, then we're not giving people that experience that we're trying to put forth in a subtle way. And so we just keep it au naturel.
It reminds me of, there's a couple of questions that brings up in my head. The first one being analogous to skating first at the Olympics. If you're a skating judge and you're watching the first skater and then the 16th skater, you haven't necessarily built much context for the first cask, but you've got quite a bit of context by the 16th cask. Mm-hmm. So how do you, you go within your home environments, within your controlled environments, I'm sure that you have some mitigation processes so that you've built in a certain amount of blanket contextuality over the course of a tasting session. What are the mechanics behind that, if I'm not way off?
That's a terrific question, Dan. That's a really smart question.
It's a great question with, I think, potentially two different answers, right? If you're tasting whiskey from a single distillery, then context is going to be, oh, lovely.
Just opening some tenure. Just wanted to show.
Nice. Then your understanding of context is going to be different, because each whiskey you taste one after the next, is within one house, within one distillery. And so you could be getting a bit more into nuance and less into more stark differences, right? But for the most part, when Jason and I are selecting casks, we'll have 5, 10, 15 samples somewhere around there, and it will be from multiple distilleries, sometimes 2 different cask types from the same distillery. And then we just have to parse things out in a manner in which we think will allow our palates to just last a bit longer, right? So the obvious things, we're not going to start tasting the peaty stuff. We're not going to start tasting the super sherried stuff. We're going to line it up in a way where we're comfortable that we're not doing a disservice to any of these samples.
Yeah,
makes sense.
And the other thing I would say is we'll often say to each other, you've reached the 3rd sample, go back to that first one. Like, put your nose back in that first one. Are you getting the almonds now? Are you getting the floral component now? Then we can, okay, now 2 into 4. And while I think that's useful, it's something we're very careful of doing, because again, when you're the consumer, you're not having that same experience. You're not able to bounce from sample 3 back into sample 1. And so we are careful, even though we do like to do that. But it's to your point, Dan, of keeping the first performance in mind. I think that's what we're now using captivating to get at. You might be surprised how often we select the first or the earlier sample more than we select the middle or later.
Yeah.
And then we're asking ourselves the question, well, did that set the standard? Is that now the thing that we compared everything to? And so it's a bit like a tasting, and I'm sure you Dan, and you, Cameron, have had this experience plenty of times when you're in a tasting with somebody, and when somebody walks in and they sit down, it's their first whiskey of the day, no matter how you start your tasting, they say, oh, that tastes like whiskey. It smells like whiskey. I feel it in my chest now. And by the time they get to the 6th one, they're like, oh, I've got so much vanilla and so much chocolate, and I don't even get any alcohol burn on that at all. Are you sure this is the highest alcohol? And it's because you've just lived that life, right? You've just done to your palate all the things we've talked about in this conversation. And so, and the thing we always say is, if you could somehow shuffle up the order and then all get in a time machine and then all go back to 7 p.m. or whenever the class started, no matter what had happened previously, everybody would say that first one, whatever it is now, is the most alcohol. It's the most whiskey of the whiskies. And it's like, so the thing that we have to get over is there is no perfect way to sample the casks. There's no perfect way to select the casks. There's no perfect way to share those casks. There's no perfect way to drink those casks. And so within each particular moment, it's really just adhering to the best experience that we possibly can. And it would be a way for that skating judge to say, okay, let's put the 6th performance side by side on videotape with the first performance, right? You're going to learn a whole bunch of things about the first that you didn't, and you're going to learn more about the 6th. So some approximation of that is what we're always aiming for.
We've got a question that's come in for you guys specifically regarding your business model, and does just throw that up on the screen there from Wyatt. How do you distribute your products, and how could that potentially change in the future with changes in retail?
Do you want to tackle that, Jason, or would you like me to chime in?
Yeah, this is your side of the business. My question is, what are the changes in retail? Did I miss a memo today? What's happening to retail?
I think he may be alluding to the rise of reservebar.com and drizzly.com and delivery methods, and not necessarily being in the bricks and mortar establishment when you make your decisions.
Gotcha.
I don't want to read too much. Wyatt, if I'm off, send me a comment. But that's how I'm reading it anyway.
Gotcha.
Yeah, well, Drizzly and all those are newer to us. They're of course new to a lot of people, but I know so many are taking advantage of it. We were in a tasting 2 weeks ago with Bren, and someone tasted a whiskey, ordered a bottle on Drizzly, and it came 30 minutes later while that tasting was still happening. So I see like how awesome stuff like that could be. That's really, really cool. Yeah. So as Jason mentioned earlier, back in 2011, when we started the business, everything was online. Very similar to, say, the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. You became a member, and then you had access to our whiskeys. You'd purchase it online. We would have a retailer deliver it to your doorstep. And we can't ship to all states, but we can ship to many states. And by we, I mean a retailer. Legally, a retailer has to deliver those bottles. And so that model still rings true. And we still sell plenty of things online. But in 2017, we introduced our retail line, and we're now distributed in 26 states at this point.
Congratulations, man. That's huge.
That's really
massive.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
Well, I mean, what an accomplishment. That's a mind scrambler. I'm just trying to launch a damn live YouTube channel, and you're selling your whiskeys in half the country. So kudos to you for that.
Cheers.
That had led me to another question regarding, so your relationship with Impex, is that your supplier? Is that officially the supply chain you come into the U.S. through, or are you your own supply chain into the U.S.? Are you your own importer?
Well, yeah. So from the very beginning, Impex was the importer of Single Cask Nation products and continues to be the importer of Single Cask Nation. But in 2015, I left my day job to join the team at Impex. So I'm importing our whiskeys, which is very fun and funny, along with Kilhome and many other brands. But so that rings true. So being with Impex, and now Impex having exclusive rights of distribution on a retail line into the U.S., we're benefiting greatly from their distribution network. Yes.
Very cool. And I was able to sit in on a Zoom tasting with Sam Filmus. It was a Kilhoman event. He seems like a really great guy. So he picked a terrific company to be aligned with. So again, congratulations on the success that you've had. The one thing that this whole show. And a lot of what I'm doing and what Cameron and I are doing collectively is to try to take a little bit of a different angle on consumer interface in terms of the kinds of things, the kinds of stories that are even easily leverageable by an individual brand. Those are out there, and they're riddled with a certain amount of propaganda. And what we're trying to do here is to tell a broader, longer story arc involving more elements, so that consumers understand that there are stories that they deserve to hear that aren't being told because they're difficult to leverage by a single brand. So the reason that one of the reasons that I'm fascinated by you guys, for one thing, but one of the reasons I wanted to have you guys on it is because I find, and this is again, it's just me, and I want to get your take on this. I find that independent bottlers, distillery bottlings, single cask offerings from distillers, and blended Scotch whiskey are all important chapters in the greater story of Scotch whiskey's novel.
Absolutely.
And each of them benefits from the presence of the other. And I sort of see, if you've seen one of those pictures that when you look at it from a long way away, it looks like one thing, but you went closer, it's made up of pictures of other things. And then if you get closer, those pictures are made up of other things. It feels like what you guys do is you're a particularly fascinating pixel. And that's what, Joshua, you and I have talked about this a establishing relationships with the kinds of distilleries that you want to buy their products. The fact that you guys are thinking of yourselves as extensions of their brand ethos has got to be a big part of why they want to work with you. I'm sure that there are, and I'm not sure, I assume just as human nature, that some independent bottlings want to leverage the power of that distillery, but they don't really give much of a damn about that distillery. They just want their juice. Whereas you're looking at it from the standpoint of the holistic relationship between the two. So if you look at like what the Single Cask Nation is a very specific look at a single very fascinating pixel in that portrait. And particularly if you're looking at the kinds of casks that are, this has veered off a little bit, not into a ditch, but veered off from what the brand is already constantly saying about itself. This is a different aspect of their character that consumers may not be have active and regular access to. Let's say at a place like Glenmorangie, putting out a single cask offering is such a dicey proposition because so few people get it and so many people are pissed that it becomes a net expense for us just in terms of the brand damage of it. Yeah. So the fact that you guys look at those things and you give consumers an opportunity to deep dive into the funky recesses of the psyche of a given distillery. And then the distillery has an opportunity to show a different side of itself, and then a more macro side of itself with its distillery bottlings. Then we'll have a discussion in a couple weeks about blending, about the blender's art, which I think is one of those buzzwords like chill filtration that somebody hears blend and they're like, depending on what echelon of the consumer sector in Scotch whiskey they perceive themselves on, they may have a knee-jerk reaction to that term when in fact it's an incredibly important part of creating brand consistency even on the single malt level. So you have these different pages or different chapters of the book. And I think the good independent bottlers are an incredibly important part of that. It's like looking at a crystalline moment in time, where the distillery is looking to tell a story of what has gone on in a more in a more identifiable brand evolution. You're looking at this. This happened right now in this moment in this cask at this place, and it's magic, and it'll never happen again. Glenmorangie, Ardbeg, whatever. It behooves brands like that to show that magic can happen over and over, and that takes a different process. But a particular type of magic that you put in a bottle is fleeting, and you own that, you leverage it, and people trust you because you find the fleeting moments. You catch the firefly in the bottle, which I think is absolutely fascinating. But for consumers, all of those coexist for an important set of dialects that tell the story of Scotch whiskey from not competing, but importantly different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to get that out there so that we were all talking the same language. This kind of thing, I think, from a consumer perspective, I hope it's empowering. What I said at the beginning, that I end up talking about that a lot in my presentations. I know you guys do too. At the end of the day, drink what you like. But from the Moet Hennessy perspective, one of the things we talk about is Epicureanism. The more you know about the thing that you're enjoying, the more you enjoy it. So this is really just a leveraging and empowering of information that hopefully consumers take back with them and feel more empowered to explore the category more deeply than they realized they even wanted to or that even existed. And you guys show that. You show the rabbit holes where people didn't even know they existed. And I think that's a really important part of this broader discussion.
Well, thank you, sir. Cheers.
Oh,
man. It's we're coming up on an hour. I'm just going to rattle through and see if anybody's got any questions. Oh, here's a comment from Catherine in Austin, Texas. Obviously, Sam, the Kilhoman event that I did with Sam was with Catherine's group, Austin Scotch Lovers, and we had an absolute blast. You were instrumental in helping us set that up. Here's a comment from Mike Nolan in Chicago, I think. Fair enough.
Sounds like a challenge from my dad.
I think it does, actually.
Oh, that's so funny.
Challenge.
And there was one up here. Let me think. Oh, I wanted to point a couple things out just for the folks that have bore with us as long as they have. Here's one from BJ Reed. I did look this up on YouTube, and I'm going to post the link to it on something. Probably on the Highlands to Islands Facebook page right after this show. There's going to be two links. One to a chill filtration study that was done in 2016 by Whiskey.com that's really, really interesting. And then this one, the Jerry Tosh chill filtration demonstration on YouTube. I'll throw that up. Anything that you guys would like to... I know that you're just about to launch or release the Whistle Pig bottling that you are... that's just about to happen for Single Cask Nation. Is that right?
It sold out last week. Yep.
Oh,
That's
terrific. Good for you.
Sold via lottery. 900 bottles sold via lottery, and they're shipping this week. And so we've got a lot of excitement in the nation about when those bottles will be landing on doorsteps.
Very, very cool.
We've got
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
and we've got just really quickly a bottling with Balcones that we did. We're really excited about, and a bottling with Penderyn as well. So we'll have a single malt Welsh whiskey hitting our store shortly.
Oh, very cool. One of the other things that I'd love to talk with you guys sometime about, because Joshua, you were the one that hooked me up with the idea of it. This is a Gervin 10 that you guys bottled, and I bought a while back. But you single-handedly changed my mind about grain whiskey. Single-handedly, because I was one of those guys who sat around going, "What's the point?" And then you gave me one, and I forget who made it, but it was at Water Life, and it was the best damn whiskey at that show. It was a very old grain whiskey, and it was astounding. So someday, after we get through our present slate of topics, we'd love to have you back on to chat about, because we don't make any, but I find the process of it really, really fascinating. Cameron and I are sitting for WSET3 in February, so we'll be talking a lot about column distillation coming up somewhat soon. So we'd love to have that conversation. I've just posted that whiskey.com study on chill filtration, and let me see if I can just start this without cutting everyone off so that I can get a link, and I can. So that's going to get copied and then closed, and then I'm going to put this up here. Okay, those aren't coming through. So for whatever reason, they're not coming through. I'm going to try this again, and it will also fail. Oh, no, it didn't. Sweet.
There you go.
That's terrific. But thanks a lot, guys, for being a part of this thing. You guys are on Facebook and Instagram as at Single Cask Nation. You're both individually on Instagram, and I've got your links in the description for this show. Cam's got his show on Mondays and Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern, Whiskey Through Food. Please check that out on Instagram Live. We're here every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern on Highlands to Islands on YouTube and on Facebook. Check out my landing page if you happen to find yourself at my Instagram page. Click on the link. You go to my landing page, sign up for my newsletter. There's pictures of me wearing ridiculous stuff. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks guys from Single Cask Nation. It was a pleasure speaking to you both, and we'll invite you back again soon. Thanks, Cam. Good to see you. Any final thoughts from you, Cam?
No, you absolutely nailed it. Gents, it was absolutely fantastic being able to reconnect with you and being able to speak whiskey. I'm a huge fan, and I cannot wait to pick up some more bottlings from the nation.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you
both
so much,
very
Cameron.
It's been a blast.
Excellent. Thank you. Absolutely. We'll talk again. We'll talk again soon. Have a good afternoon, and we'll send you an invite for the Grain Whiskey Show.
Cheers.
Lovely. Cheers.
Thanks a lot.